Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I guess we are good to start now. My name is Leslie Zeng, Lesliezeng, and today I'm going to give a talk about what I learned through my ongoing project. This is an ongoing project, and the project is a 2D adventure side-scroller inspired by Chinese and Greek mythology. To give you a really brief impression about what the game is. So basically in this game, you play as a headless wanderer, traversing mystical worlds and finding for its lost head. So that's the catchline for this game. First, I would like to introduce who I am. So I'm a game designer and also an educator. So apparently I make games, and along with making games, I also teach how to make games. I teach at RPI, which is in Troy. Troy is very close to Albany. So basically, I use game design principles to give my students a playful learning experience. I also use teaching to deepen my understanding of the media and experiment with what I have learned through teaching. I have taught almost all the fundamental classes in my department, except only one class, Intro to Game Art. Not all classes, I mean all the fundamental classes, all the required classes. So my profile is often associated with programming or coding with much less emphasis on narrative design. But throughout my teaching experience, I feel like the storytelling class has enlightened me most. I often had the stereotype that narrative design or storytelling is only for writers, and I don't identify myself often as a writer. I feel like identification is a really good way for people to know me, and also for me to pave my creative path. But I think it's probably also a boundary that discourages me to explore a new potential. I'm very grateful that I had a chance to teach those classes with a really wide variety so I can bridge them all together and build my own independent knowledge system about games. So this is the agenda of topics I will cover in my presentation today. I will specifically talk about my design principles that guide everything, and such as the art direction, narrative, and the mechanics. For example, why I designed this headless protagonist. And eventually, I will also share a potential framework that might be inspirational for your own creative practice. Before I dive into the core game design principle, I would like to begin with a piece of artwork. So on this slide, you're looking at a traditional Chinese landscape painting from the Song dynasty. It's created by an anonymous artist whose name was suspected to be Li. The painting depicts a famous Chinese region called Xiao and Xiang rivers. In ancient times, travel was very difficult. So for those who wanted to see the landscapes but were not able to visit in person, they viewed the landscapes through paintings, such as these paintings. More technically speaking, they're actually hand scrolls. So the Song dynasty is often regarded as the peak of this artistic tradition. So as you look at this painting, you may notice that the mountains and trees are rendered with very soft and diffused ink. They look very misty and obscure. You may also notice that something unusual about the perspective. So rather than depicting a scene from a single fixed vantage point, the painting brings together multiple viewpoints into one image. It presents an imaged landscape assembled from multiple viewpoints. So this brings us to a concept that I want to focus on today, the art of negative space. In Western traditions, we often focus on what's present in an image, such as the objects, characters, and the details that occupy the canvas. But in Asian paintings, like Chinese paintings, the empty areas are as important as the painted ones because they invite viewers to participate in completing the scene mentally. And this technique of using absence as a meaningful design is what we call negative space. And this is the idea that I want to connect to game design today. The art of negative space is not just used in traditional Chinese paintings. It's widely used from ancient times to modern ages across all kinds of cultures. You might be actually very familiar with the image on this current slide because this is the landing page of Google search. I think everyone uses a search engine. And notice how much of the screen is empty here. At the center, that naturally draws our attention. We see only the logo and the search bar. And the users can immediately understand what they can do without instructions or explanations. So the empty space basically directs attention and communicates meaning through what's absent as much as through what's present. This image here is actually a practice that I use in my storytelling class. It's photographed by Cindy Sherman in 1979. I asked my students to come up with 3 different scenarios that can explain who this person is, like where she is and where she's doing in the image. The responses are always fascinating. The most common interpretation is that she is waiting for a bus or a ride to take her somewhere far from home, perhaps to work or to school or the beginning of a new chapter in her life. There are also a few dark readings, for example. One read that she had committed a murder with evidence hidden in the suitcase. So I hope you can see here, there's a suitcase next to her. And she was attempting to flee the scene. But there's also one interpretation saying that she's planning to commit a suicide by getting hit by a car. I'm not sure if anyone can read that through this image. However, I questioned that student, why would she bring a suitcase with her if she wanted to commit a suicide? So overall, the image here provides a few clues. We see a woman clearly in the center of the image. We also see a suitcase next to her. We also see a really broad road. There's very obvious there's a road, and also some distant landscapes. But it can generate a lot of different stories based on the responses from my students. So by looking at the 3 examples together, the painting, the Google landing page, and also Cindy Sherman's photograph, we can begin to see how negative space serves different purposes, depending on the media and the designer's intent. So in media like art, negative space is often for encouraging different interpretation and perspectives, such as in the Chinese one, such as in this one here, the negative space dissolves focal points and obscures realistic details. Viewers can imagine what lies beyond what is shown with open freedom to look at anywhere. And in this one, in the Google, in Cindy Sherman's work, we see there is a clearer focal point. So focal point basically is where attracts your attention most. So we can clearly see there's a focal point in this photo, and the focal point is the woman. But the image also leaves a lot of information unstated, so viewers can fill in the gaps and construct their own narratives. On the other hand, the Google homepage is very different. It uses negative space in almost the opposite way. It reduces interpretation. The large area of the empty space is for guiding users' attention towards a focal point, which is the search bar and the logo. The design minimizes distraction and ambiguity, so the intended action becomes very clear. So, however, 2 things can be true at the same time. There's a way we can guide viewers' attention while also leaving gaps for them to imagine. The goal is not to choose between clarity and ambiguity, but to balance them. The balance is exactly what I wanted to achieve in my games. I wanted games to understand where to look and what to do, while still leaving enough space for curiosity, personal interpretation, and discovery. So that is this one line here basically summarizes my core game design principle. The game has a clear form that guides action, paired with subtle ambiguity that resists singular interpretation. This slide here is very text heavy. It basically just breaks down the core principle into 3 categories of my game design. In gameplay, I want players to understand the rules directly through play instead of through instructions. In narrative, I want my players to understand the context of the world, but I also want them to piece together what happened and to make their own interpretations. And in aesthetics, I want to establish an emotional theme, but each player's emotional experience will remain as their own. So now we can look at something more visually appealing. First of all, as a disclaimer, I'm not really a professional painter or illustrator, but I still try to do everything by myself in this game. I want the game art to feel very clean, clear, and readable. I want to emphasize motion, depth, and the direction through the uses of lines. In a sense, clean lines already uses negative space. A line is defined by what surrounds it and what doesn't surround it. This lets the form become legible. Clean lines make you concentrate. Your eyes will naturally follow the stroke while your brain fills in the surrounding emptiness. And the continuous line can carry both structure and suggestion. When an image is immediately legible, it also produces an immediate emotional response. So viewers can immediately feel the emotion. And in contrast, I guess as a different example, excessive complexity can slow down this process. Excessive complexity can shift the experience from perception into an analysis. Well, because in this way, clean lines, however, in this way, clean line almost work as a shortcut that reduces cognitive friction. I also have a lot of good art references. I definitely won't be able to show them all today, but I want to show you a few ones that I think that really can speak to my game. So the first one here is from the game Plug and Play. This one also uses a very similar minimal abstract art style. It has some headless features that reduce human forms to eccentric actions and objects. Next one, these are sculptures from the Tang Dynasty in ancient China. They're stone torsos of standing Buddhas. And what's notable about them is their fragmented condition. So as you may see in this image, many of them, well, there are only two of them, but many of the sculptures are missing heads or limbs or other body parts. The damage was not intentional, however. It probably resulted from historical events such as anti-Buddhist campaigns who decapitated the heads and smashed the bodies. They could also be damaged during antiquity trade and smuggling. I guess for most Western audience here, I guess a familiar comparison would be Venus de Milo. Has anyone ever heard about Venus de Milo? So basically in Venus de Milo, both arms are missing. However, in that case as well, scholars believe the arms were lost in antiquity or broken during a tussle. I believe the missing arms for Venus also wasn't intentional. And what interests me most about these fragmented works is that their incompleteness makes them more valuable, because their missing parts create curiosity. We want to imagine what once existed and how the object came to be in this current state. And not just for me, the incompleteness is also appreciated by Japanese cultures. One example is kintsugi. It literally means using gold to mend. Originally, this technique was a practical method for restoring damaged objects to be reused rather than thrown away. And over time, it became aesthetical. The repaired fractures were no longer seen as flaws to hide, but as visible traces of history and transformation. For the environment art in my game, I want them to feel very mystical and spiritual. A lot of hand scrolls from the Song Dynasty are very good examples. And one of them here is called Early Spring. So in this one, you see they use layers of ink wash to soften forms and dissolve lines into the atmosphere. It creates a sense of depth and makes the painting feel very elusive, while the image is still legible. You can still see the mountain, you can still see the trees. They're visible, but they're partially hid by the atmosphere. And in certain parts of my game, I also want the environment to feel very invasive, violent, and aggressive. Such as, this is an example from the Japanese hand scroll burning of the Senjo Palace in Kyoto. I especially like the part of the flames. If you I hope you can, I mean, maybe you cannot really look closely from the presentation here, but highly recommend searching them online. So yeah, if you look at the lines of the flames, they're so alive. You can feel their movement, their speed, their hunger. They're going to devour the world. It feels really good. Yeah, so these everything I just talked about, these are the art references for my game. Next, I want to talk a little bit about my narrative. So I haven't mentioned the title of my game yet. So my name is called Autis. So why do I want to name my game Autis? So in English, the name Autis means nobody or no one. Originally, it comes from the story of Odyssey, which tells the journey of Odysseus. So if you don't know the journey of Odysseus, basically it's about how he manages to return home after the Trojan War. So he spent 10 years in Trojan War, and he also spent 10 years to return home after the war. And during his travels, Odysseus and his army land on an island inhabited by cyclopes. Cyclopes basically are one-eyed giants who are very aggressive. And when the giant Polymephus asks Odysseus for his name, Odysseus replies Autis to him. It's more like a trick. So later, after Odysseus hurts the giant and attempts to flee, Polyphemus cries out for help, and he shouts, "Autis is hurting me," which literally means nobody is hurting me. So the other giants didn't come to help him, and Odysseus successfully escaped from that island. Beyond the meaning of nobody, Autis also carries the connotation of a nameless person or a person without identity. So therefore, as a game title, it also implies the theme of anonymity or a protagonist who exists outside of society's order. It could also be someone be forgotten, erased, or never fully realized by anyone. The theme is, I try to make the theme visually embodied from the very first moment, such as a headless wanderer. The first question most players would ask immediately is, why does he have no head? So that reaction is exactly what I want. The missing head is not just a gimmick or a way to attract attention, it's the central mystery of the story. So once player begin asking why the protagonist has no head, that question leads to a series of others. Well, he finds his head, what happens if he finds it? And more importantly, what happens if he doesn't find it? So by unfolding these questions, the story is quietly but tangibly embedded into the game mechanics. Currently, I finished making the first chapter, and I'm currently working on the second one. Each chapter, so basically I want to, eventually I want to make 3 chapters in total. And each chapter will answer one or maybe multiple questions. And right now I'm also building chapters in a linear order, but my long-term goal is actually want them to be played in a long linear way. So how I want this to be played in a long linear way. But first, I believe many of you probably have already known this. This is the 3-act. This is the traditional linear structure for a 3-act story. Basically follows the sequence of inciting instant, confrontation that develops the process, and a resolution that gives the outcome. But what I actually want is a fluid version of the 3-act structure. So I don't want to orient players toward a single correct order of events. I want the story to feel open as how it's approached. And to reach this, I want to reference the concept Buddhism. So in Buddhism, karma describes a system of action and consequence. Basically, your intentions shape the outcomes. In a very simple understanding, basically, good actions get good consequences, bad actions get bad consequences. However, what many people don't know is actually the cause and effect are simultaneous. What that means, basically, the intentions and outcomes don't follow a linear timeline. The moment a thought arises, the consequence is already set up. So time doesn't create the cause and effect, it reveals them. In this logic, meaning emerge from relationships between events instead of their order. So we can also use a game to explain this concept. How many of you have played a jigsaw game before? I hope everyone has played a jigsaw game. Okay, so basically, imagine yourself playing a jigsaw game, and you grab a piece, you look at the piece's shape, and then you try to look for another piece that matches the one you're grabbing. So gradually you start forming relationships between fragments. The important thing is you play a jigsaw. When you play a jigsaw, you don't see the full picture in advance, but you can imagine the full picture while piecing together the fragments. So in this way, you understand the narrative from connections instead of from predetermined sequences. There's also a problem that I probably will try to solve, because if players can start at any chapter, that means each chapter must be able to stand on its own. So meaning, because if you ever made a game, you need to let player know the basic controls of your game. So means I might result having repetitive instructions for the player. So the challenge for me is I definitely don't want the instruction to be repeated. I also don't want an instruction page on the title screen. I definitely will still need to solve this problem. But I do have a mindset. I know that I don't want to tell the story through words. I want to tell it through mechanics. The game still contains dialogue and text, but I try not to rely on them to explain what's happening or what the player should do. Well, many times during playtest, I noticed player would actually quickly skip the dialogue because they already knew what to do through the gameplay. So as a result, I redesigned how dialogue works. Originally, player had to click an object or character to trigger a conversation, but now dialogue can just automatically appear when players physically approach a subject, and also disappears when the player moves away. In this way, the text still exists as a support to those who need additional guidance, while more experienced players don't need to read information they have already understood. So just want to show you a few examples how I let mechanics talk by themselves. Well, first of all, this is a side scroller. So the side scrolling format is already communicating something to the player. Most players have learned from experience that side scrollers involve moving left or right through a space. The position of the character on the screen also suggests the direction. So basically, if the character is closer to the left side of the screen, players tend to move right. If the character is in the center, the intended direction might become more ambiguous. This is the first dialogue in the first chapter. It teaches players that pressing the enter key, continues the conversation. I know many games teach this by placing a simple icon in the corner of the dialog box. Well, I actually did something very similar here, but maybe many people won't even recognize the icon as the enter key. So basically, if you look at the right bottom, the arm, so that arm is actually a enter key. Basically, it's an arm with a missing hand and an arrow that represents the enter key. So instruction is part of the narrative, but in this example, the dialogue works as an invitation. It guides players to make a certain action. But instead of saying press enter to continue, it says press enter and the world might answer. So basically, it teaches the mechanic while setting up the mystical theme. The enter key icon changes in this dialogue since the speaker is now a divine character with a head. The hand is inspired by a sculpture of Zeus. The gripping gesture conveys a sense of divine power and strength. The arrow also sculptures the arm muscle. So in this dialogue, the messenger god Hermes is teaching the player how to jump by pressing the space key. And once again, this is not presented as an instruction manual. It shows the highness of the speaker while delivering the instructional message. And to balance the amount of information and the player's attention, I always think camera is a really good tool for orienting players' eyes in a very subtle but less disruptive way. So for example, if you want the player to interact with an NPC, zoom in the camera when the player approaches it. If you want the player to freely explore the environment, zoom out the camera so player can see a much bigger picture. And in this image here, you see the players stomping on the ground. The impact shakes the salt particles and they fall into the eyes. So this draws inspiration from civilization of deserts. So because I don't know if any of you care about desert, but basically over irritation and the water loss can cause the salt in the desert, in the land, to accumulate in soil and turns the fertile land into a barren and lifeless surface. So basically in this context, jump is not only a way for the player to move vertically, it also draws the player downward and applies the force into the ground. So the jump mechanic basically carries additional layer of meaning. It's not just about a vertical traversal. It's also embedded into a physical and ecological context where gravity and impact are part of the system. So besides using gravity, so in this one, I definitely also used jump as a vertical traversal aspect. So in this one, you see the players moving up through the wet and slippery stairs by jumping. So while a waterfall is pushing against their movement, I want the interaction to feel very playful. The character does not need to climb stairs in a way that are real, such as what we do in a real human world. So jumping becomes the primary movement, even in situations where we not normally expect walking or climbing. So you see here, this is the same jump mechanic, but it carries different meanings depending on what environment asks of it. So how do I let the mechanic speak based on looking at a few examples? Environment basically is the medium that does the job. Players interact with the world responds, and that response becomes the voice of the mechanics. I try to make as many objects interactive as possible in the environment. There are also situations when I only want players to watch, but not in the forms of like a cutscenes or something players won't be able to act. So basically players still have the full control and they choose where to look. It's like playing flat games where watching and the moving are the core mechanics. Yeah, so you may be familiar with the definition. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with game studies, but there's one scholar, Dolena Meadows, basically, she said in her book, a system is a set of things interconnected in such a way that they produce their own pattern of behavior over time. So what I want to show you here, basically, this is a really simplified graph, how meaning emerges from interconnection. And this is a simplified map of what players can do in my game. So not just the entire game, just a few actions, such as move, jump, and swim. Move and jump often occur in a similar environment, while swimming only happens in water. Mechanics are never isolated. They're in conversation with one another. That's what makes the game a system rather than a sequence of independent actions. And the design question in a system design is usually it's not just what does this object do? It's asking what does this object do in relation to everything else. So that's pretty much all I want to share for my project. But before I finish my presentation, I also want to share a possible framework that can be useful for you if you're interested in exploring similar ideas. And the framework has 3 principles. The first and most important principle is to establish clarity. So I really like, even though I really like making and playing art games, especially games that focus on expression. But I do believe, no matter how deep or complex the message behind the game might be, players must be able to approach it. So clarity is the foundation for abstract meanings to emerge. Compared to other artistic forms, I think games has a lot of challenges. It has a challenge of balancing between aesthetics and functionality, such as a painting, for example, can be appreciated just by looking at it. But a game requires interaction. And players often need to understand how to interact with the world before they can appreciate the meaning behind it. So in many cases, clarity is established through visual elements, such as the way how objects are presented and how space is organized. I believe many of you know this painting. This is the Last Supper. And it tells a story when Jesus shares his final meal with his disciples and reveals that one of them betray him. So I believe even if this is your first time seeing this painting, I think you can easily guess who Jesus is in this painting. So he's the man at the center of the table. There are 13 people in total in this painting. So 6 decibels on the left side and 6 decibels on the right side. It creates a symmetrical composition that naturally draws attention toward a single man in the middle. And the painting however, the painting also contains a lot of information, such as the facial expression, their gestures, the food on the table, and also the architecture in the background. But despite all the details we see here, your eyes will still be immediately grabbed by Jesus. This is because the composition emphasizes through placement and the visual hierarchy. And now this is a really different example. So this is the example very similar to the Chinese paintings I showed to you before. So unlike the Last Supper, there's no focal point that immediately attracts our attention in this one. Yeah, so we see a few boats, a sun rising up or settling down, a few brush strokes that depicts the landscape. So the space feels very sparse and empty, but there's a coherent harmony you can feel. The emptiness and the absence of explicit details create a structure that connects everything together. The composition is organized for viewers to navigate and make sense of what they're seeing. The second principle is contextualizing mechanics. So, I mean, even though I don't identify myself as like an illustrator, but I actually once studied at an art school. When I was in the art school, one word often came up very constantly, which is context. Does everyone know I hope you all understand the meaning of context. So context basically means the background information. It means the setting. So for example, when we study a piece of art, to fully understand art, we cannot just look at the image. We also need to know the artist's personal life, their education, the culture they lived in, and the historical moment where the work was created. So in this way, context is a non-visual link that connects the viewer to the artwork. I think the same idea applies to game mechanics. A mechanic is not just a rule. It also carries a meaning through the context where it happens. Does everyone know what this game is? Okay, Tetris. Everybody play Tetris. So yeah, this is the original version of Tetris. I'm also running a little bit short, so I'm going to go a little bit faster. But in many versions of Tetris, there's a really interesting one created by a Slovenian website. This is their edited game. So basically, well, this one has a really heavy, even though it has a really cartoonish style, but it actually has a really heavy historical context. So basically, at the end of the Second World War, thousands of people were killed, and many of them were buried in a mass grave. In this game, the mechanics are almost unchanged from Tetris. You still arrange the falling pieces into a confined space, but the experience feels completely different due to the context. Yeah, the last principle is withholding explanation. So you may be very familiar with the phrase show, don't tell. This principle directly draws from that idea. So as game designers, we often worry about whether players are confused. During playtests, we find problems and work so hard to eliminate them. With each iteration, we add explanations, hints, and signposts to make the experience clearer. However, I think it's really good. It's a good thing, actually. Not confusion is the problem. Not all confusion is a problem. If everything is explained so well, there's no room left for players to ask questions of their own. I also want to share a really there's a old Chinese saying: when the moon becomes full, it begins to wane. When the water reaches the height, it overflows. So basically, the idea behind that saying is reaching a complete state often marks the beginning of a decline. So how does that connect to withholding explanation? So I think resisting the urge to explain everything helps create a living experience that continues to move. The absence of explanation keeps multiple interpretations alive simultaneously. The player never resolves what the experience meant. So I want to use my game as the last example. So even though this is still an unfinished game, I definitely want to continue developing this around the 3 principles I have discussed today. And the game is also called, it's not just Artist, it's actually called Artist 2028. 2028 also has some special meaning to me because This is the 10th year I have been stayed in United States. So this is the 10th. This is like a 10th year mark for how long I've been staying in the U.S. It's also a remake of a game I originally created in 2021. I decided to remake the game because I was very dissatisfied with the endings, and I felt I could do much more in the world building, especially the narrative part. So this allows me to revisit the original ideas with what I have learned so far through teaching. And this is my contact info. And also, if you're interested in playing the demo of my game, feel free to scan the QR code here. And we have, I believe, 11 minutes left for Q&A. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so questions. Clara, yeah. Can I what?
Do you want to finish this game?
Yeah, I actually. Yes, I do. I do want to finish the game. So I want to finish, and I understand. So the question is, do I want to finish the game? I think I understand why you're asking this, because it feels like, especially when I told you withholding explanation, I never want to reach the fall. I feel like I want to always leave something for me to chase after. So there's an endless loop. I can always keep working on this. But I think this is also something. I feel struggle a lot working as a solo developer, because when you come up with a lot of new ideas, you feel like you just have so many things you want to implement to the game. But I think now what I'm learning is I definitely want to finish this. Maybe not. At least I want to finish like there's a system, there's a complete system for player to experience, but then maybe the story will keep going. So yeah, so I think my answer for you is yes, I will continue finishing a system for player to experience, but I will keep the story to be remained as some like a mystery for people to always think about. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious with a game like this, especially when you're putting so much thought into what you're providing to the player, what you're making clear to the player where you're looking at beauty. At what point in the process do you seek outsider feedback on that? Or how much are you sort of trusting your instincts as a designer, or what's too much or too little? And where is it useful to start bringing other eyes or other hands on the project?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question is, how much do I trust my instinct? How useful the player feedback could be, and also what information can I get besides my players' feedback? So I try to target. I try to find. Well, since I'm developing this alone, so I also don't really have a lot of resources for finding players. My strategy for finding players is usually finding my target audience. I kind of know who might be really interested in playing this game, because I just reach out to them. Are you interested in this type of game? Do you like my art? Do you like the mystery? Something like that. So I think that's so I would try to find my target audience. And I think most of the time, the feedback I try to get from them is about more like the control. So like, do they understand how to use the control? Do they know what they're supposed to do? But I don't really want to hear the feedback. Well, actually, I also asked them a question like, what do you think the story is telling? What do you think is the story? But I often don't really consider too much about the story part, because I want that to be interpreted by a lot of players. I mostly just take my players' feedback for fixing the bugs, for fixing the control, for anything that doesn't allow them to freely explore the world. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the fluid 3-act structure you were talking about. And you mentioned that you were still working out some details of how that would actually work. And something I'm curious about is, how do you encourage a player to sort of like attack that in any way they want? Because I think if you presented like, here's act 1, act 2, act 3, play them in any order, I think most people would still play them 1, 2, 3. So
Yeah.
How to present those acts in a way that encourages, I guess, random exploration.
Yeah, so the question here is, how do I, since I want a fluid story structure, so how can I present the story structure to player to allow them to not starting from linear. So actually, they can still start in a linear order, but I just want to give them more freedom. This is actually a really bad example. This is currently my title screen. This is definitely something I will not use when I fully finish the game. I guess I would maybe use the structure more like this. So because when you see like a circle, like something that doesn't suggest a sequence, the player will be more interested. It will be more likely for players to randomly begin at a chapter. Yeah. Did I answer your question? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Since the mechanics are sort of supported as storytelling, like what is the text?
Oh yeah, sorry. This is I think is in here. Yeah, so I'm not. Yeah, so the question is, like, what did I do with the text? So I still have some kind of. I think some of the text still reads as an instruction, but I try to make them. I try to add some like a additional layer to the of meaning to the text. So because I know I'm making a mythology game, so I often try to make my instruction read as. Like you're reading a mystery story. So I'm also not really like a professional writer, so I try to keep my text as simple as possible. So I want to make my text like very easy to read, very easy to understand, but it still has a feeling of like you're reading a folklore, something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, since you're in the back, I don't. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
When you were trying to interpret text technology in this game, did you find that it affected the story based on drawing from, simply with the gameplay, or did you find it to be like all kind of specific?
Okay, yeah. So the question is based on all the mythology I have as my inspiration in this game. Do all the mythologies do they direct me into the same kind of storytelling, or do they differ in, or do they give me different different, I guess, direction in storytelling? Is that your? I guess I rephrased your question. Okay, so. I think they in a really interesting way. I think the Chinese mythology and also Greek mythology, they all kind of they're pretty much they fit very well. I think because I think this is a really interesting about human anthropology, right? Because even though there are so many different regions, but we can often find similarities between the cultures in these regions, also including the mythology. So. I find I find a lot of common theme in around the Chinese and also Greek mythology, such as and relating to my personal experience personally, especially this stories about finding a lost identity, or I guess also as a somebody who wasn't born and also grown up in the United States, we also try to find our own position in a foreign country. So so basically, this is also kind of, although not a personal game, but I guess kind of has some kind of personal standpoint that that I can connote from the current time to something really far from me, like the mythology, because I think the mythology also has a really similar meaning. Like as an individual in a really large world, how do you find yourself? How do you find your position? Yeah.
Can you one more?
One last question. Okay, one last question. Yeah. Yeah.
So one, I love the way that you're presenting mythology. And I was just wondering, I always wonder this about games that are adapting any sort of mythology. How do you think about designing the games for people who are both people who know nothing about these myths, and they need to know a lot about them to understand that context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question is, how do I make the game for audiences who know nothing about these mythologies and audience who know who almost know all the mythologies. So I think this is the target audience we're talking. I think strangely, really strange, because the players who played my game, partial of them know Chinese mythology, but they don't know Greek mythology, and partial of them know Chinese but don't know Greek but don't know Chinese mythology. But so I think both groups can they both like this game a lot. So I think. But I never let anyone who doesn't know or doesn't care anything about mythology. I also wonder like what's gonna like if they play my game, because I feel this game is very artistic, and I'm not sure if people who are used to playing, very game, I'm not sure if they will like it. So that's, unfortunately, I'm not sure if I can answer this question, since I never really let this game be played by known target audience. So, but if I have the chance, I will do some tests. Yeah. Thank you.